Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast. You're in the right place if you're a growth-seeking being who acknowledges the challenges and delights of your humanity on the path to an ever more conscious life. If you want to feel inspired to love and accept yourself, to feel free to be and express you in all your brilliance, if you want to truly value yourself and others and feel energized and alive both at home and in the world, then sit back and take a breath as you explore and grow the brilliance of your beautiful human self with your host, the father of non-personal awareness and creator of the MPA process, Joel Young.
Hello, and welcome to episode 18 of Be a Brilliant Human with me, Joel Young. And welcome if you're back again for more. I hope you know how much I appreciate you choosing to spend this time with me. I love that you choose to tune in and listen to my meandering ponderings and musings on these topics. And I'm hoping that it gives you pleasure, value, some entertainment, all that good stuff. And if you are new here, so good. Welcome to me. Welcome to the podcast. I love that you found me. Do go ahead and hit that subscribe button wherever you are listening to this. And I'm always open, if you're regular, you'll know this, I'm open to feedback. You can leave me a message on the beabrillianthuman.com website or hit me up on social media. For the most part, I'm at Joel Young MPA. There's also a page on Facebook, which you can just search MPA Rocks, and you'll find me there. So this episode today, as they say in the movies, is inspired by true events. Actually, speaking of the movies, we are in awards season, so I'm going to blow my own trumpet. I won an award. Yes, I did. I won the Expansion Catalyst Award 2019. Thank you to the Evolutionary Business Council for honouring me with that. I'm kind of stoked, and I just said on social media, just put it up on social media, I feel like I won an Oscar. So today's episode, I'm digressing, is inspired by true events. So it's all about birds and fear. Now, I wrote that down. I laughed to myself because I was raised, born in the 60s and kind of grew up in the 70s. And birds back then in the UK was like another word for like girlfriend, going down the pub to see if I can get some birds. Very un-PC now. So birds and fear. Now, this is not a dating episode. However, if you want fearless dating, I actually have a friend called Artie Joshi. He has a great podcast called, would you believe it, Fearless Dating. So if you want to find out about fearless dating, I do recommend you go and check out Artie's wonderful podcast. Just search Fearless Dating. She also goes through the platform Anchor, same as this podcast goes out on, which means it spreads itself far and wide across the interweb, and certainly on iTunes, Spotify, and all those wonderful things. And I will actually put a link to Artie's podcast in the show notes. So yes, birds and fear. So I guess before we dive into it, let's talk a bit about fear in general. Well, first thing to say is, fear is part of life. I think like so many things that I like to sort of stand on my soapbox about, things get a bad rap, and the idea is we're supposed to eradicate fear. Well, there's good reason for it. Fear is part of our survival strategy. But, so often within us, the fear that's inside there is based on some story in our head that's either, straight up not true or at least grossly exaggerated. I always remember one of my great mentors and teachers, Byron Katie. If you haven't heard of Byron Katie and the work of Byron Katie, that's byronkatie.com. She tells this wonderful story, which I'm going to attempt to tell you. She says this. She says, so she was walking along, and then a foot hit something, and she looked down and she saw a snake, and she was terrified. And, her heart was pumping, it was racing, and, all the adrenaline was kicking off. And then she looked down and she realized it was actually a piece of rope. And as she says, try in vain to scare yourself silly, thinking that's a snake when now it's a rope. And that's often the trick with fear. Sometimes when you look it in the eye and you see it for what it is, it doesn't seem so scary. So if you're not being metaphorically chased by a hungry tiger, where fear's ability to pump you full of adrenaline so you can run like Forrest Gump, then, chances are the fear is just a limitation. And in those cases, it's worth looking at how you can overcome those fears, which is what today's episode is about. Have less limits and achieve and experience more in this brief and wondrous tick of universal time that we call a human life. So that's the stuff that I'm going to focus on today. In fact, fear is a vast topic. So I'm actually going to focus on 4 things that some birds highlighted when I was watching them. I'll tell you all about that in a moment. Which can point to or remind you of some of the ways that you can deal with those likely false or unfounded fears. And of course, I'll be offering some practical suggestions on how to implement each of them in your life. Does that sound good? Good, then let's spread our wings and get right into it. So I spend actually quite a lot of time out in wildlife looking at what's going on with the creatures. In fact, myself and my wonderful partner, Karen, or maybe I should say my bird, Karen, we love wildlife photography and do go out there and do it. In fact, I'm going to give her a plug. She's really an amazing wildlife photographer. I think I do pretty good, but she's fantastic. And you can find her page on Facebook if you just search Kiki T Photography. That's Kiki, Kiki, and then T, and then photography, and have a look at some of her pictures. But we do a lot of looking at wildlife is birds. But the first story I want to tell you is, or both the stories I want to tell you, is more of a domestic situation, because Karen's garden is absolutely amazing, and it's home to Jack and Silver. I'll tell you about them in a mo. So let me tell you about Karen's garden, because it's amazing. She spends a lot of time nurturing it with she's got feeders everywhere, and she puts fat balls out and fat cubes and seeds and nuts. And so there's lots of birds that come and visit her garden. In fact, she gets like crows, jackdaws, magpies, all those, and even jays, beautiful jays, all the corvids, for those twitchers of you out there. There's kites that fly overhead where she lives, and then even cormorants, because she's quite close to the river, and seagulls, and even flocks of geese. There's a great spotted woodpecker comes and visits. It sits on the top of the tree. There's nuthatchers that store nuts all over the place. And of course, the usual in this country, blue tits, great tits, long-tailed tits. Even blackcaps are regular, along with dunnocks and blackbirds. And of course, robins. Now, Jack and Silver are a couple of robins in her garden. And this was so interesting to me to watch this. So right, when we first met the one we called Silver, he was a juvenile, a young thing. Well, she, hard to tell the robins. Maybe one of you can tell me how you distinguish between the two when they grow up. They were different to begin with, because Jack was the grown-up one, and then Silver was the young one. But Silver was young and fearless. And one of the things that Karen gets is mealworms and puts them out. And we'd sit out in the garden, and she'd put them on the wall by us. And Silver would literally just fly up onto the wall, look us in the eye, as if chirrup at us, as if to say thank you, and gobble down a few of those little mealworms. Whereas Jack would not do that, really. He'd sit away and he'd wait for us to go, and then maybe he'd come and eat some. He'd even chase Silver off, but he wouldn't stop and stay and eat that close to us. But eventually, after a time, in the end, he did. I guess Silver grew up, and then robins are very territorial, and Jack chased him away. But then after a while, Jack would be just watching us, and eventually he began to get more and more safe and feel more and more safe. And now he will happily chirp at us when we go out, sit there. He'll say, "Oh, have we got worms?" Not like that. That sounds bad. Have you got some mealworms? And then we'll put them on the wall, and he'll pop up, and he'll be very happy, sort of coming very close to us. And by the way, if you're thinking, poor Silver actually went down to the end of the garden, set up his own territory there. And these days they're quite on friendly terms. So we're kind of wondering if maybe there's a male and female, and they're kind of getting ready to spring. So maybe this is about fearless dating after all. So there we go. So it was really interesting to watch how bold young Silver was. and then how over time Jack sort of went from being fearful and cautious to being much more courageous and actually really without any sort of true fear of us. So that's one story. I'm going to refer to these stories later. Okay. Now the other one, kind of really inspired me doing this episode. I was sat out in my yard, so I don't have a garden like Karen's got a lovely lush garden. I live in Skipton, a northern town, and more on a Coronation Street. For those of you in the UK know Coronation Street, that know what I mean. But terraced houses at the back, there's like a yard, so there's not much for the birds to come on. But I did decide to start putting out some scraps now and again. Now, round here, you generally get, well, the crows and seagulls. There's lots of seagulls around me. So I put the scraps out, and really interesting because, you know, a seagull comes, sits up on the aerials, on the houses opposite, and starts calling out to others, and they come flying in. But they're all kind of circling around. The first time I did this, it all circled around, squawking and squawking, and the crows came and they sat up on the roof and they were squawking, but not coming down. And then suddenly this pigeon turns up. He sits on the gutter on the house opposite. He looks down, he looks around at the seagulls, and all the crows, and it's like he went, "You wusses." So he came flying down, and this fabulous greedy pigeon just started gobbling up and pecking away at the scraps. At which point, all of the birds went, "Oh my God!" So the crows and the seagulls all started diving in. Of course, I had my camera ready, snap away. An absolute frenzy ensued. And it's really interesting because I've done that a few times, and I've noticed that because, I was sat there with my camera during this, right? I should have painted that bit of the picture earlier, but I was sat there with my camera, and my yard isn't big, so they're only like 10 feet away from me. So it took the pigeon to sort of inspire them to come and have a go. But I've actually sort of continued to do that since that first time, a few more times. And I noticed that, now the seagulls and crows they don't wait for the pigeon to come along, but they seem a little more, what should we say, brave. They're coming in faster and starting to come down and take the scraps. So I guess maybe the idea that they're a bit more safe with me sat there with that strange one big-eyed thing up to my face that clicks whenever they're close. So those are the two stories that kind of inspired me to do this episode. So that one time I sat there going, it's interesting to observe how they respond to fear. So what does all this teach us about overcoming fear? Well, I've thought of 4 things that this illustrates, so I shall share them with you now. Okay, so the 4 things that birds can teach you about overcoming fear. The first one is that clear desire overcomes fear. Fortune favors the bold, my friend. Sometimes you just got to take the plunge. So going back to those 2 stories, Silver, as a young juvenile, just dove in. Give me those mealworms. I don't care. I'm not, the desire for them overcame any trepidation or fear he may have had of me and Karen. And the same with the pigeon. I may have been sat there with my camera, and all the seagulls and the crows and everything else that was around was sort of holding back. The pigeon was like, food, me want food. Straight down, no fear at all. Just there gobbling up the scraps. It was very simple. They knew what they wanted, and any fears they may have had were overcome. I know I've had this experience where, when I first started this podcast, did I have no fear the first time I turned the microphone on? Of course I had fear, but I was very clear that I wanted to do a podcast. I was ready. It was time. I knew why I wanted to do it. And so I was able to overcome the fear, and here I am on episode 18. So sometimes getting clear on the desire is really strong. So you need to have a strong and clear. So another way of saying that is you need to get super clear on your motivation. So how can you apply this? So if you're afraid of doing or saying something, well, first of all, why are you even considering it? Why was I considering even doing a podcast if it was a scary thing? there was some deeper motivation that was going on. So that's a good question to ask yourself. If you're thinking of doing something, but fear's coming up, well, why are you even considering it? There must be some juicy sense of what can come if you can overcome that fear and just do it. I mean, what do you really want? What amazing beneficial outcome can you see if you actually go ahead, if you take the risk, if you're bold, if you go for it? A great question I love to ask when I'm faced with a scary story in my head is, it's sort of run with it. Even if my scary story is true, or if I take a chance, I might fail, for example, why would I choose to do it anyway? In other words, what's my deeper motivation? Even if I might fail, maybe my motivation, like with the podcast, why would I do it? Even though it might be rubbish, people might hate me, all the stories that go on in your head. Well, at least I've given it a go. At least I've sort of honored my desire to have a crack at it. It's like those are the kind of motivations that will help you get clear on it. So even if your scary story might be true, and it probably isn't, why would you do it anyway? So getting clear on your motivation, which gets you clear on your desire, and that desire can overcome fear. All right. Number 2 is safety in numbers. So remember how I told you that the first seagull turned up. I had the scraps on the wall. First seagull turns up, but he didn't come straight down. He sat on the roof and he started making this call. It's really interesting to watch. So he sort of called out, looked around, this particular call, and more appeared. So it's interesting how seagulls call in other seagulls. I mean, it seems at odds. I mean, if you think back to, what was it, Finding Nemo, where they're all sitting along there going, mine, 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 the greedy seagulls. You'd think, there he is, single seagull, all that food, just ready to go. He could just jump down there, wolf it all down and have all the scraps himself. But no, he had the sense, or in a way, he had the wisdom to acknowledge that he was too afraid to come down by himself. So he called his brothers in. He's not, sometimes if we're not sort of quite there yet, it's good to acknowledge that. Sometimes, we don't have to do it on our own, really. I mean, in fact, I think the greedy pigeon, calling them all wusses, not that he did that, but that was my little projection, was perhaps a little bit unfair. I mean, with think about it, with lots of seagulls around, there's lots of them squawking. There are lots of eyes on me and less chance of me in their eyes kind of pouncing without warning. So it's that safety in numbers. You don't have to do it on your own. It's all there. So how can you benefit from this lesson? Well, again, it's sometimes, it's really good to get help with overcoming fears. We don't always have to do it on our own. There's actually great power in acknowledging that, to really acknowledge that, I can get a sense of the desire, but the fear's kind of getting in the way. Then get some help. So whether it's friends or family or an experienced coach, just like me, or getting, just get some help and support when the fears have got you. That's a real kindness to yourself. If you do want to get help from me, as you can just go to beabrillianthuman.com. You'll find a link there somewhere, or just go to joelyoungmpa.com/sessions if that's where you want to go. But whatever you do, get some help. It's okay to not be able to sort of conquer the fear on your own. And it can be really great, actually, to get some help. So that's number 2, safety in numbers. Which brings us to number 3. Number 3 is FOMO can overcome FOTA. Okay, so if you don't know, FOMO is FOMO, which stands for fear of missing out. And FOTA, I kind of just made up, FOTA, which is fear of taking action. So FOMO can overcome FOTA. So similar to desire, it's kind of it's sort of an about face, but it's very, very powerful. So again, I noticed that once the pigeon went for it, the seagulls and crows, they were in there, diving in. The greedy pigeon was chugging down those scraps, and if they didn't act fast, then they might miss out. So that sort of fear of missing out, it sort of overshadowed the fear of, what might happen. So scarcity, or the FOMO principle, is actually quite a powerful force in the human psyche. So in a sense, if you can't quite sort of get to the desire thing, or that's not cutting it, you can use the FOMO as a way, again, to overcome the fear. So if you're gripped with indecision, inaction, worry and doubt, you know there's an opportunity within your grasp, but the fears have got you. And again, that positive desire isn't quite cutting through. Just try some FOMO, in terms of helping you to motivate you. So here's some good questions you can ask yourself. So you can ask yourself, what are you missing out on by succumbing to the fear? I mean, that goes directly to it. So think about the opportunity, why you're attracted to it, and what great things it could bring you that you'll miss out on if you don't take action. And, ask yourself, what would it cost you to not take action now? See, most of these actions are about making a change. So again, if you don't change, if you continue doing what you're doing and the pattern continues over time, what's that going to cost you emotionally, financially, in terms of health or in your relationships, whatever it is? You can even turn the volume up, see yourself a year from now, looking back. If you took no action, if the fear won and you missed that opportunity, would you regret it? So how does that feel? Even if the opportunity comes back around, say a year later, and you took it then and got all those benefits, would you regret having denied yourself a year of experiencing those benefits? So remember, these questions aren't designed to make you feel bad. That's not what I'm driving at. They're another way to overcome the false and limiting fears and access that motivating force that will move you to action and get you what you've already identified that you want. All right, that's the FOMO principle. Which brings us to number 4. So number 4, slightly different, but number 4 I put down as trust is built on evidence and experience over time. So let's come back to Jack. Remember Jack and Silver, the two Robins. Robins are funny, they sit and they just watch you. They watch what's going on. They'll chirp away. They're generally relatively brave compared to a lot of species. But Jack would kind of watch Silver. He'd watch Silver. He'd sit sort of a bit away, and he'd watch Silver come, and Silver would just come. He was bold. He just came and sat on the wall and got his fill of mealworms. And as I said, Jack would come and see him off, try and scare Silver away. But, he wouldn't stay. He wouldn't stay and eat the worms where they were, at least not while we were around. But over time, he would start to sit closer and closer to us. And occasionally, we'd throw a few worms a bit further away from us, sort of halfway across the garden, and then he could come and get them. But now, with those little steps, a little bit safer, a little bit more trust, now he just comes and sits on the wall, just like, Silver used to do. He'll sit there. He's only like about 2 feet away from us. He'll chirp. He's like, where are my worms? Where are my worms? Brave as can be, but he's again built his trust with evidence and experience over time. And you know what? At times there's tremendous wisdom in caution. Again, not pushing yourself beyond where you are. So Jack kind of reminds us that, again, that trust is built on evidence over time. And that's a great principle to remember. If you think about it, lack of trust is like a deeply embedded form of fear. But again, conversely, trust itself is a deeply embedded antidote to fear. So on these times, it's worth building trust where you can. So, and sometimes we lose trust in ourselves. I mean, if fear has stopped us from taking those opportunities, for example, sort of over and over, or we've taken the plunge only to sort of to back out and let ourselves down after a short time, that's where you've lost trust with yourself. And this is where small moves and baby steps are your friend. If you go back, or if you've listened to it, but if you go back to, if you haven't heard it before, episode 2, the second episode I did was my 5-point blueprint for growth. And number 3 on that list was consistent baby steps. I am a huge fan of small moves and baby steps. So crucial because they help you to get traction. So, when trust is like a scarce resource in an area where you really want to build or rebuild it, because there's that desired outcome, just ask yourself a simple question like, what small move, what small action, what small test can I do that will build my trust? So let me think of an example. So exercise is classic. So you start an exercise regime and you want to get fitter. But you signed up to programs before, you got overwhelmed, you collapsed on your commitments, and then you just gave up. So you've betrayed your own trust when it comes to your commitments to you. And perhaps that's happened a lot in different areas of your life. So that level of trust in yourself is pretty low. So in that situation, it's worth, first of all, I think a really good thing to do is identify what level the repair of that trust needs to begin. So what I mean by that is maybe it's just about the exercise. So if it's just about the exercise, focus there. You can ask yourself, what exercise can I easily commit to? Maybe a walk once a week, maybe just 10 bicep curls every other day over the next 3 weeks, whatever works for you, but it's something you can easily do. But if you sense it's a bit deeper, maybe there's many areas where you've lost trust in yourself, then you may need to go back, beyond the exercise and focus in on that deeper level of self-trust. So, again, but even before you go into the exercise thing, like work with what's deeper. So if that's the case, and it's really more about just a general sense of lack of trust of yourself, you can ask yourself, what commitment can I make to myself and easily keep? It's a simple question, and anything will do. In fact, it might seem like ridiculously insignificant or small what you come up with, something that you can easily, a commitment you can easily keep. But I tell you, it's not ridiculous or insignificant, because each commitment you keep, no matter how small, affirms your capacity to keep a commitment to yourself and begins the process of building that trust. Again, small moves and evidence and experience over time. So, even if it has to be something like, today and tomorrow, I'm going to, at some point, stand up, stretch up to the ceiling just once, relax, take a breath, and then turn around 360 degrees just once, then so be it. Seems like what use is that? But if you feel you can do that, just doing it is a step towards building trust. And as you step by step build your trust or rebuild trust in yourself, all sorts of possibilities can open up. Again, going back to fortune favors the bold, that was one of the within the first one. People who really build a bedrock of trust in themselves do become bold indeed. So that's the 4 things birds can teach you about overcoming fear. So I'm going to do a quick recap after the little song. Okay, so let's recap. So number 1 was clear desire overcomes fear. So a strong enough and clear enough awareness of the positive benefit of stepping forward in spite of the fear can be enough to overcome it. Number 2 is safety in numbers. Sometimes we need the help, support, and encouragement of others. Of course, it needs to be the right support, and depending on the circumstances in your environment, that might mean professional help. And I'm here. Number 3 was FOMO can overcome FOTA. So FOMO can give you leverage enough to end the paralysis and actually take action. Focus on the opportunity, the benefits of seizing it, and the cost to you and your life of not seizing it. What will you miss out on if you succumb to the fear? And number 4 was trust is built on evidence and experience over time. If you take the time to build trust, it's a strong antidote to fear. It's all about repeating and building upon small steps, ideally neither overstretching or understretching. So again, ask yourself, what small thing can you do to build your trust today? So that's a wrap from me. Thank you so much for being here. As ever, I hope this episode stirred you, touched you, and gave you a perspective that helps you up your game in some form. As ever, I'd love to hear your feedback. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast wherever you are. If you're on iTunes or somewhere that gives you a chance to leave a review, I'd love a review. If you'd liked it, give me a lovely review. That would be fantastic. And if you want some help from me, again, that link is joelyoungnpa.com/sessions. And as always, you can find this episode and all the episodes at beabrillianthuman.com/episode number. So today it will be beabrillianthuman.com/18. That's where you'll find the show notes and the links, everything you need there. Otherwise, have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you next week. Oh, yes, I've got to say, cue the moo.